as soon as they arrived from Africa. The excellence of black fiddlers who were performing for white masters and patrons and paying audiences, as well as for dances and parties of their own black communities, speaks not only to the training in European violin playing that some slaves received, but also to traditions of fiddling on African bowed instruments that slaves brought over from Africa. Some of it started out as slave fiddling, in which talented slaves were sent to places like New Orleans to learn how to fiddle standard dance tunes like Zipcoon. Everybody would have known it. But also Native Americans and Mexican Americans developed important fiddle styles in the Southwest. Now, fiddles were extraordinarily popular instruments during the era. They were very lightweight, very portable, and increasingly mass-produced in the 19th century. They were very easy to buy and come by. A single fiddle could service an entire dance. As such, slaves were encouraged or forced to take up the instrument, and musical ability was considered a highly prized skill. The fact that numerous runaway slave ads note that the sought-after individuals were fiddlers or had in their possession a violin suggests that the increased mobility and income may have facilitated escape for some. Did you want to read an ad, or did you bring that?
Yeah,
we'll do that at the end, maybe.
Okay.
We'll show you some actual ads that are published that say what the slaves had with them when they escaped. We'd like to play at this point actually a tune that is called Pompey Ran Away, and we'll go into Mississippi Sawyer. That prior to his enslavement, fiddling is the passion of his youth, and it provides him with supplemental income that helps to sustain his family during periods of insufficient employment in agriculture or carpentry, where he's skilled. Music was an ideal side career for someone in such circumstances, although, as Northup's story illustrates, it did not protect him from the dangers of being black in the U.S. at that time. He's captured and enslaved while touring as a circus musician. Ferrying south toward the Louisiana plantations that would become his deplorable home, Northup's freedoms are violently stripped away. But his talent as a first-rate fiddler travels with him, and it becomes a defining element of his experience of slavery. Fiddling granted primarily the male slaves an unusual degree of mobility, as well as opportunities for additional income. Being a fiddler meant a day away from the grueling labor in the field, as well as opportunities to briefly socialize with other musicians. It presented the unusual opportunity for a slave to be entering into the upscale homes of whoever was hosting the balls or the dances. Northup expresses pride in the fame he earns in the Red River region, noting that he was known widely as the Ole Bull of Bayou Boeuf. You will talk later about Ole Bull and who that was. Because of Northup's sought-after talents, his masters hire him out extensively to play at the fashionable balls of nearby plantations, as well as the Christmas dances held yearly for the slaves. At one ball, he was tipped $17, an extraordinary amount that he used to furnish his cabin with the bare necessities. In contrast to these more favorable gigs, Northup was also forced to perform during his savage master's alcoholic binges. These events were held for hours on end in the middle of the night, as Northup's fellow slaves were commanded to dance. For Master Epps, Northup is a mere musical device, almost like a prototype of a phonograph, full of tunes that can be made to play on command. Northup's passion and economic livelihood are thus converted into a mechanized musical labor commodity under slavery. Now, fiddling has been associated with classic American heroes that we have. For example, George Washington had his favorite fiddle tune, Jaybird Sitting on a Hickory Limb it was called, and I wish I had found it. I cannot play it for you. I did not find it. Thomas Jefferson, of course, was a violin player. He loved fiddling. He wrote music and he played for Mozart and fiddle music. His favorite tune was Grey Eagle. Davy Crockett was a ferocious fiddler. The tune Crockett's Reel is still played today, and I read that he held fiddling and bagpipe contests in the Alamo, something like that. I think the bagpipes won. And Andrew Jackson.
So did the Mexicans.
They just make them win because they want them to shut up.
And Andrew Jackson's victory over the British in the War of 1812 is still celebrated with the popular 8th of January fiddle tune. And who here actually is familiar with the fun fact that the Lewis and Clark expedition had 3 fiddlers with them? I want to see a show of hands. Who knew that?
I didn't know that.
The most notable one was Pierre Cruzat, the son of a French father and Omaha Indian mother. He was actually incidentally one-eyed and shot, I think it was Lewis that he shot because he couldn't see very well. But he was the expedition's main boatman as well as its most prominent musician. I do digress a little. Let me get back to the 12 Years a Slave. In more modern times, Henry Ford started a series of fiddling contests in the 1920s to help preserve the old American values. You see, whether in New York State or New Orleans or a backwoods swamp plantation, fiddling was a thoroughly popular form of entertainment, widely enjoyed by Americans, slave or free, rich or poor, native or immigrant. And we are playing for you Roaring River. Right after we finish the guitar. Roaring River, which is actually mentioned in the memoir of Solomon Northup.
Yeah, so he mentions a few actual pieces of music, and this one he not only mentions in his memoir, but he has it printed. And so in the back page. So, and it had words to it. The words don't really match the melody quite so well, so we're going to play it as a tune. There's a song that's written in 1828 called Jump Jim Crow. And it was written and performed by a white comedian by the name of Thomas Danforth Rice, or Daddy Rice, sometimes went by the name of Daddy Rice. And he performed this solo, and he was dressed in very strange, odd, shabby clothes, and he would blacken his face with burnt cork. And he'd sing this song, Jump Jim Crow, that he wrote. while dancing around and doing an occasionally, sort of strange hopping motion. The story goes that he got this song, he sort of lifted it. He's from a black slave. They're not sure where, Cincinnati, some people say, but no one knows exactly where, but this fellow was an elderly man, he was stable hand, and Rice watched him while he was doing his working, and as he was working he would sing, and he was crippled, so he had this sort of strange hop that he would do as he was working.
Oh, I'm fine, thank you.
Jump Jim Crow was an important step in the history of American popular music because it's imitating black Americans, African Americans. This song, it'll be difficult to believe once you hear it, but this made him hugely famous. And he toured all around the country. He added dozens and dozens of verses to this, and he actually made it into a whole evening entertainment of this one song. Somebody dug up where there were 150 verses that were written to this song, but sometimes this show would have 60 or 100 verses, and he would write new verses for whatever was happening, like politically during the day. For example, there's an election while he's performing contest between Jackson and Henry Clay, and one of his verses is in support of Andrew Jackson. The song became an international hit, and in the early 1830s, there's a newspaper account, an American newspaper account, that says the two most talked about people on the entire planet are Queen Victoria and Jim Crow. When an American ambassador arrives in Mexico in the early 1840s, he steps up to be received, and the brass band there plays Jump Jim Crow under the mistaken belief that it's the American national anthem. The term Jim Crow becomes a derogatory or pejorative term for a black person by about 1838. So when laws for segregation start getting passed between 1876 and 1965, they become known as the Jim Crow laws. There's an old folk tradition about dancing crows. Supposedly farmers would put corn in their field, they would soak the corn in whiskey, and when the crows would alight and eat, they'd become drunk and they'd sort of stagger around you, they could club them.
What did they hope to accomplish by that?
What's that?
What did they hope to accomplish by that?
Fewer crows eating their crop, but I suppose more crows drinking their booze. I'm not sure how that works exactly. So once again, some of the lyrics are
unsanitary.
Yeah, but we're going to sing them anyway. Because it's just important to hear just how outrageous stuff was then. I mean, sensibilities are quite different. Note to self, do not drop the guitar. So here's just a couple of verses. I'm not going to do all 160. Yeah, I know. Yeah, right, good. Come listen, all you guys and boys, I was just from Tuckahoe. I'm going to sing a little song, my name it is Jim Crow. Wheel about and turn about and do just so. Every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow. Oh, I'm a roarer on the fiddle, way down in old Virginia. They says I play the scientific like Master Paganini. Wheel about and turn about and do just so. Every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow. I go down to New Orleans, and fiddles are full of fight. They put me in the calaboose and keep me there all night. Wheel about and turn about and do just so. Every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow. That's enough of that, I think.
That's enough of that.
You get the idea, though.
Say something about what he wore.
Oh,
and
yes.
that became...
No, that was good. No, you say it.
Well, what we read about Tim Rice, when he was on stage in his blackface makeup, He wore a striped suit and I think a vest with stars and a tall hat. And everything was ragged and outrageous and completely not what people wore back then. It was a parody and a caricature. But Uncle Sam was modeled after him. He was actually quite influential in American sort of iconography. Or it is very
You can't make
sad,
this
but
stuff up.
you can't. We are so connected to these characters from the 19th century. The more you read, the more you realize how it's still in our lives everywhere you look. And I turn the page and I will talk to you about blackface minstrelry, and black clowns in American circuses. Let me put this down safely on the side
Yeah, is
here.
that going to be all right?
Yeah, it'll be fine.
It's only from 1691.
That's right. It predates all of it, yes. Now, blackface is a form of theatrical makeup used by white performers to represent a black person. It is often considered offensive because it can imply stereotypes and caricature of black people, as it was in minstrel shows. But it was an important performance tradition in the American theater for roughly 100 years, beginning around 1830. It quickly became popular, especially in Britain, of course. White blackface performers used burnt cork and later grease paint and shoe polish to blacken their skin. And they would exaggerate their lips and often wear woolly wigs, gloves, tailcoats like Tim Rice, ragged clothes to complete the transformation. There is no consensus about a single moment that constitutes the origin of blackface. It's hard to trace. Whites routinely portrayed the black characters in the Elizabethan and Jacobean theater, most famously in Othello from 1604. However, Othello and other plays of the era did not involve the caricature of blackness, and that's a crucial distinction, that it wasn't a parody and making fun of blacks. Now, closer to the 19th century, in the 18th century, in 1769, an actor by the name of Lewis Hallam, who was a white actor, used blackface makeup in a in a play that premiered in New York City in the same year, and he played the role of Mungo, a drunk black man in the play The Padlock. And it's very well documented because it was hugely famous and popular. The play attracted notice, and other performers adopted the style. So from one single theater play, it sort of just goes out and spreads, and other people start copying it. So from at least the 1810s then, blackface clowns were very popular in the States. We're now going to the circus, the traveling circus of the early 19th century, where you would have clowns perform, and these were white people on stage. There is a distinction. Later we have black people on stage, but not in 1810. You wouldn't have had a black person on stage. So here you have, George Washington was a big fan of black clowns in traveling circuses. Blackface clowns performed in them from at least the 1810s and maybe before. By the 1820s, it was a staple of American entertainment. The wide red or white mouth painted on by our modern clowns, the tailcoat, the wigs, and the gloves are still remnants from blackface from the 19th century. Something I never knew. I never even questioned that. I took clowns as clowns. But it's a little bit, it gives me a little bit goosebumps to now know more than that. Now, in the minstrel show, which was a performance by white performers putting on the blackface and caricaturing, is that a verb? Caricaturing black people on stage. It was called the Blackface Minstrel Show. And it always had the same characters on stage. It was very formulaic. Jim Crow was one of the characters on stage in the Blackface Minstrel shows. He was the carefree slave. Turn around and do just so, wheel about and do just so. Mr. Tambo and Bones played tambourine and the percussion castanets made of bones. They were the two endmen on either side. The characters would be seated in a semicircle, and Mr. Tambo would play the tambourine and Bones would play the bones. You would have Zip Coon, the caricature of the free northern black man that was trying to educate himself and attempting to put on airs or rise above his station. He would have a female counterpart, the provocative wench, as Miss Lucy Long, named after the song. You would have the character of the old darky from the plantation, who was very happy to be on his plantation, and his female counterpart, the matronly mammy. They were all buffoonish, lazy, superstitious, cowardly, who stole, lied pathologically, and mangled the English language. The parody in minstrel shows was often savage. Early blackface minstrels were all male, so this was done in drag. Cross-dressing white men also played black women, who were often portrayed as unappealing and grotesquely mannish. Of course, that was part of the comedy. The 1830s American stage, where blackface first rose to prominence, featured similarly comic stereotypes of the clever Yankee and the larger-than-life frontiersman. You had the conniving Jews, you had the drunken, brawling Irishmen with blarney at the ready, you had oily Italians, you had stodgy Germans, and the gullible rural rubes. It was, I guess, the flavor of the part of the vernacular of the day of humor and entertainment. Over time, the minstrel shows developed into standard form of 3 parts. I'm just going to walk you through because we're going to talk about it a little bit later on. Incorporating skits and songs performed in an imitation of black plantation dialect. That's the black vernacular that sometimes we have to clean up. In the first part, the show began with a walk-around, the company marching onto the stage, singing and dancing. The staple of the walk-around was the cakewalk. White audiences loved the cakewalk, not realizing that it originated with plantation slaves imitating their master's walk. The troupe was then seated in the semicircle, with one member on each end playing the tambourine or the bones. The endmen were tambour and bones, and they engaged in an exchange of jokes between the songs and dances. It was customary for tambour to be slim and for bones to be fat. A character called Mr. Interlocutor sat in the middle of the group, acting as the master of ceremonies. As the interlocutor took his place in the middle of the semicircle, he uttered the time-honored phrase, "Gentlemen, be seated. We will commence with the overture." During the performance, he conducted himself in a dignified manner that contrasted well with the behavior of the rowdy endmen. Part 2 was the variety section and the precursor to vaudeville. It included singers, dancers, comedians, novelty acts, and parodies of legitimate theater. A preposterous stump speech served as the highlight of the second act, during which a performer spoke in outrageous malapropisms as he lectured, actually on a stump, and at the end he would gesticulate so wildly that sometimes he would fall off. It was all part of the act of the stump speech. His demeanor was reminiscent of the hilarious pomposity of Zip Coon. Zip aspired to great wisdom and intelligence, but his hilarious mangling of language always made him appear foolish and ignorant. And part 3 ended the show with the one-act play, or a vignette of carefree life on the plantation. That was the blackface minstrel show. Although the structure of minstrel shows changed over time, the images, blackface, and the content, the caricatures of blacks, continued. Prior to the Civil War, pro-slavery whites used the racist stereotypes as a way of countering the abolitionist movement. Performers defended slavery by presenting denigrating stereotypes of blacks who supposedly needed the civilizing influence of slavery to keep them in check. Black slaves were portrayed as happy and content with their lot in life and fearful of life outside of the plantation. As a result, blackface minstrelsy played an important role in shaping the perceptions and prejudices about blacks and African Americans in particular. Some social commentators have stated that blackface provided an outlet for whites, of the whites' fear of the unknown and the unfamiliar, and it was a socially acceptable way of expressing their feelings and fears about race and control. The black mask, and I quote Eric Lott in his book Love and Theft, Blackface Minstrelsy and the American Working Class, and I quote, "The black mask offered a way to play with the collective fears of a degraded and threatening other, while at the same time maintaining some symbolic control over them. The blackface makeup acted as a fool's mask, allowing minstrels to discuss topics that might otherwise be taboo. Now, minstrel songs, especially those written in the second half of the 19th century, arose in reaction to rapidly changing conditions within the US. Emancipation, immigration, industrialization, urbanization, etc. And with the Western expansion and the growing influx of Chinese on the West Coast, the new Asian immigrant fell smoothly into place as another target of ridicule in speech, dress, diet, and culture. But that's for another show. Now, in 1840, black performers, now this was all white people with makeup. Now, black performers were also performing in blackface makeup. They had to cork up. They had to paint their skin even darker and put on the lips, the exaggerated lips. One of the first blacks to perform in blackface was William Henry Lane, the inventor of tap dancing, who was known to audiences as Master Juba for his famous dancing skills. When blacks began to work as minstrels in the mid-1840s, their contribution ironically did little to alter the tradition. Indeed, it only reinforced the racist black stereotypes already ingrained both in the theater and in society.
Was the audience supposed to know he was black? It was obvious that it was a black person wearing blackface?
I think so.
Yeah, they
Not
were sold as the real. These are real black people doing real plantation entertainment.
That's my next paragraph.
Sorry.
I'm glad you're so interested. Initially, blacks were able to participate in minstrel shows only by declaring themselves real coons, which meant recently freed slaves. To meet the expectations of both white and black audiences, black minstrels blackened their already dark skin and performed comedy routines using the traditional caricatures. They just fell right into the mold. African American blackface productions also contained buffoonery and comedy by way of self-parody. There was a nuance. Unlike white audiences, black audiences presumably always recognized blackface performance as caricature and took pleasure in seeing their own culture observed and reflected. So it was received a little differently. It's very nuanced, the difference. Now, Frederick Douglass generally abhorred blackface and was one of the first people to write against the institution of blackface minstrelsy, condemning it as racist in nature with inauthentic northern white origins, which is true. Douglass did, however, maintain, and I quote, "It is something to be gained when the colored man in any form can appear before a white audience." Mark Twain absolutely loved them. He wrote in his autobiography later in his life, and I quote, "The extravagant minstrel show was the show which to me had no peer, and a thoroughly delightful thing. It was a sensation." And you will find, so for another show, again, great material. He uses it in Tom Sawyer and later in Huck Finn. There's influence of the blackface minstrel show. But to end, despite reinforcing racist stereotypes, blackface minstrelsy was a practical and often relatively lucrative livelihood when compared to the menial labor to which most blacks were relegated. Owing to the discrimination of the day, corking up, as it was called, provided an often singular opportunity for African American musicians, actors, and dancers to practice their craft. They didn't have as many opportunities, obviously. Some minstrel shows, particularly when performing outside the South, also managed to poke fun at the racist attitudes and double standards of white society or champion the abolitionist cause. It was through blackface performers that the richness and exuberance of African American music, humor, and dance first reached mainstream white audiences in the US and abroad. And it was through blackface minstrelsy that African American performers first entered the mainstream of American show business. And you know the trajectory from there. Time for music.
That's great. So we mentioned one tune that Roaring River that he cites in his memoir. Incidentally, just as an aside, his was not the only memoir of a former slave to be published in the 19th century. There were well over 100 of them. But this is the one we've been talking about. So there's another thing he mentions. Oh, when he gets to the slave pen in Washington, there's some guy playing a fiddle, another slave, and he's very boldly says, ask the kid. From that, you think the Virginia Reel is a particular tune with a particular set of notes, that this is called the Virginia Reel. In point of fact, there was no tune known simply as the Virginia Reel. It was just a type of dance music. It was a reel, of course. So we're going to play a reel.
A Virginia
Okay, should we
reel.
just play it first and then do the
shall,
shtick?
yes.
Okay. Okay. So that's the Arkansas Traveler.
What makes
And,
something a reel?
I'm sorry?
What makes something a reel?
Fast tune in 4/4.
And the
Yeah.
steps.
Yeah, it was a-
The-
It was a
Yeah.
type of, it was a
Yeah.
fast
Yeah.
4/4 piece that you could do a real
What's the end of
dance called.
Yep, yeah.
Type of reel.
Or-
So, the Arkansas Traveler, and you talked in the minstrel show, you were talking about one of
The stump
speech.
speeches,
And that the two people on either end, Sambo and Bones, would have an exchange of jokes. So I don't really want to repeat any of those jokes, but this is one that was actually popular as early as the 1820s. Arkansas Traveler, the premise is these two guys on stage. One is the city slicker, and one is the farmer. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the black characters of Zip Coon and Jim Crow. And the city slicker asks the farmer a question, and then it's a joke. So we need
A farmer and a city
volunteers.
slicker.
Who wants to be a farmer and who wants to be a city slicker?
Say
And
no
go
more,
for it.
the other side. Hang on.
okay, who wants to be the farmer?
Whatever.
You should be the city slicker. Bottom sheet.
Alright.
You are you're the farmer, right? So so you just read answer.
Yeah,
She's gonna do
right,
questions.
got
And
that.
in between each punchline, they just play a little snippet of the tag. This bit. Okay.
Alright, so I start.
Yes,
You are the
please.
city,
Yes,
that's
city
right.
slicker.
Okay.
Fire away.
Hey farmer, you been living here all your life?
Not yet.
Hey farmer, where's this road go?
Been living here all my life, and it ain't gone nowhere yet.
Hey farmer, thought you said that mud hole weren't very deep.
Only comes up to here on my ducks.
Hey farmer, not much between you and a fool.
Just this here fence.
Well
Well
done.
done.
And this would go on and on and on and on. And up until that point, they had only played the first part of the tune. And the city slicker says, "I'm hungry. I need something to eat." He said, "Well," the farmer says, "Get no food here. Get moving." But then it turns out the city slicker asks the farmer, "How come you only play the first half of that tune?" And the farmer says, "Well, I don't know the second half of the tune. I've been looking for it for 40 years." City slicker says, "Well, I know it." And he says, "Well, come right here in the house." And then he feeds him, and the guy plays the second half of the tune, and that's the end. It's sort of a formula that goes on for years and years. So that's going to move right on to another piece. Now, this next piece is interesting. It's called Jimmy Crack Corn. And the cool thing about this is
That Bugs Bunny sings it.
Bugs does sing it, but even before Bugs, there's speculation that this, unlike the other minstrel songs that were written by whites, there's speculation that this is actually of African American origins. Let's see, what else can we tell you about this? There's a lot of debate over what Jimmy Crack Corn means.
I always
All
thought it was
kinds.
Jimmy Crack Corn.
Well,
Oh, Jimmy.
sometimes
We sang
it's
it, gimme.
well, I'll tell you. I don't, well, since Pete Seeger once maintained that the true lyrics were "Gimme crack corn," not "Jimmy crack corn," and I don't care, referencing a punishment in which the slaves' rations were reduced to crack corn and nothing else. But in this case, the author would seem to have decided that the severe punishment of just eating the cracked corn was worth it, if the outcome would be the death of his master. So that's what the song's about. Here we go.
Well, wait, one tidbit.
Yes, tidbit, go on.
During the Civil War,
Oh yeah, good. This
the
good.
blue, Jimmy Crackhorn is also known as blue tail fly. Very much like the greenhead in Ipswich. It's a horse fly, and it's the blue tail fly. And during the Civil War, this song, the blue tail fly, became synonymous with the Union soldier wiping out the slave owners. Because in the song, the fly bites the pony jumps, the master falls, the master dies. That's the story.
We don't have to do the song now.
Oh.
It's a
Burl Ives sang that.
Burl Ives, yeah. And he and Pete Seeger performed that in Burl Ives' final public appearance.
I shall be quiet now.
That's good. When I was young, I used to wait on the master and hand him his plate, and pass the bottle when he got dry, and brush away the tail fly. Crack on and sing. Jimmy crack on, I don't care. Jimmy crack on, I don't care. The master's gone away. And when he ride in the afternoon, I follow with a hickory broom. The pony being very shy, when bitten by the tail fly. Crack on and I don't care. Crack on and I don't care. Crack on and I don't care. The master's gone away. One day he rode around the farm. The flies so numerous they did swarm. One chance to bite him on the thigh. The devil take the blue tail fly. Crack on and I don't care. Crack on and I don't care. Crack on and I don't care. The master's gone away. The pony run and jump and hitch, and tossed massa in the ditch. He died and the jury wondered why. The verdict was the blue tail fly. Crack on and I don't care. Crack on and I don't care. Crack on and I don't care. Our master's gone away.
Well,
Published in 1844 or 1846. It's just after Norfolk gets enslaved.
I'm talking now a little bit about the elements of the minstrelsy show that we haven't talked about yet. I mentioned the walk around. That was the dance at the beginning, and accompanying that walk around would be patting juba. That was a rhythm that would be patted on your thighs or on your chest or on your hands to accompany the dance. I'll get to that in a little bit, just a minute. The juba dance was a group of dance containing a mix of European jigs, reel steps, and clog dance steps with African rhythms thrown in. So the juba dance, the word juba comes from Haiti, and everything was just melted in. Every influence that you can possibly find is found in the juba dance. The onlookers would form a circle, and two men would be in the center doing hand clapping, foot stomping, and hand patting of the thighs. With feet turned out and heels clicking together, generally the dancers had one leg raised as they danced the counterclockwise circle. They would end the dance with a step called the long dog scratch. When the singers forming the circle said, "Juba, Juba," the whole circle would join in for a brief time. Patting juba was done by traditional West African tribes and was brought to the States by the slaves. Pat and juba started any dance form with a clapping or slapping, thus creating a rhythm. Many times the slaves would be involved in an impromptu gathering and had no instruments to dance, so they would pat their own rhythms. Later, during the slave revolt, slave owners were starting to get wise to the use of drums being used for more than just dancing and feared the potential of talking drums to speak in a tongue unknown to the slave traders and thus to incite rebellion. These and other drums were once banned from use by African American slaves in the United States. Dancing was generally not banned, and the slaves had to use other devices such as pat and juba to create the sounds for dance as well as to hide messages in the rhythm, as the patting sounds could be heard for a distance. Not unlike how the Indians used smoke signals or the military used trumpet calls, the slaves used sounds to send messages. The Juba dance was supposedly the indirect creation of tap dance in America as a theatrical art form. Another interesting thing that you see often in paintings of the time, or watercolors, was the stick dance. The stick dance was a dance style that African Americans developed on American plantations during the slavery era, where dancing was used to practice secret military drills among the slaves, where the stick used in the dance was in fact a disguised weapon. Stick dancing was based on young men performing military drills. They practiced capoeira, a martial art of the Angolan and Congolese slaves taken to America. Now, capoeira is practiced using acrobatic moves similar to dancing, so disguising the military practice from slave owners. Now, it was disguised by the group forming a circle around the dancers in the middle, doing the acrobatic moves with their sticks, and they would be patting juba to make it look like a dance. And so the slave owners didn't get alerted to the fact that something else might have been going on there. You have a little bit of patting juba to teach the audience.
Yes. Okay.
We want to use you as our percussive element.
Don't care for it. So we're divided into two halves of the room. So the first rhythm, you guys are going to do this.
Which side is doing what?
I don't know. Doesn't matter.
Okay. But they want to know.
No. So what's my first one? It's
Bump, 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 bump.
Bump. So it's 2 on the thigh, bump, bump, then clap. So it's bump, 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 and then the last bit is bump, bump. Okay, so 2, bump, 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 bump. We'll get it.
1, 2, 3, 4.
When does the library close? Say one more time. 2, clap, 1, bump, bump. 2, clap, 1, bump, bump. 2, clap, 1, bump, bump. Okay, great. Don't forget that bit. Now you guys are gonna do bump, bump, bump.
Clap.
Stomp, 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 clap. Stomp, 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 clap. Stomp, 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 clap. Stomp, 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 clap. Stomp, stomp, clap. Great.
Okay. So you put it together.
Yes. Okay.
Well,
You know,
okay.
you guys can handle it. That's why I picked you.
I am playing a authentic Negro jig that was played in the slave quarters for the slave community. This is not from the minstrel stage, made up by white Northerners.
So let's get them started first.
Sure.
Stomp, stomp.
No.
Then
Stomp.
Stomp,
Stomp,
stomp, clap. Stomp, 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 clap. One more. Now we're gonna go.
playing? I don't know.
I don't know.
Are you playing? I don't know.
Patting Juba.
Patting Juba.
Yeah.
Can't dance.
Patting Juba.
Kathy?
Oh, well, look at the time.
Patting.
Patting.
Patting Juba.
Okay,
Patting Juba.
right.
Right.
Well, we're
It's in the
gonna
book,
just
actually,
cruise
too.
through Stephen
You are
Foster.
cruising. No, take your time. This is fascinating stuff. I'm sorry I stole it.
No, it's good. That's good. We're good.
We're good.
I can put
There's
this.
so much more stuff.
Well, you can't
Go
really
move.
talk about pop.
Come back.
You cannot talk about popular music of the 1840s and 50s without talking about Stephen Foster. He was actually pretty much the first American professional songwriter. There were some songwriters before that, but they couldn't make a living at it. Unfortunately, Stephen Foster couldn't make a living at it either, but he tried. He starts as whites in America are first starting to appropriate elements of black culture. And Foster's the first white composer to write for the minstrel stage that even hints at the dignity of African Americans. He's a northerner who wrote music that we think of today as being quintessentially Southern. He was born in July 4th, 1826 in Pennsylvania to a very lively and wealthy family, and unfortunately, when he was quite young, only 3 and a half, his father lost all their money through bad business dealings and an excessive drink, and they were forced to move to much more humble circumstances. And Foster, throughout his life, yearns for the sense of home that his mother had referred to as Eden. Most of what he learns about it is from his older brothers and sisters because he was quite young. When Foster showed interest in music, skill at a very early age, he mastered an instrument like the penny whistle called the flageolet when he was 7. When he's 14, he writes his first flute quartet, and all he cares about is music. When blackface minstrelsy first bursts onto the scene, he and his other young friends are completely enthralled with it, much to the disappointment of his parents, who see this as a way of, just mocking black African Americans. But they kind of write it off as youthful exuberance, like, when Elvis came along, or the Beatles, Ed Sullivan Show. He publishes his first love ballad at 18. He goes to college. He lasts exactly 2 months, and his parents say, look, we're broke, you've got to go to work. So he goes to work for his brother, who has a little shipping office on the Ohio River in Cincinnati. And there Foster sits at his desk and he listens to the songs of the black and white boatmen on the Ohio River. He writes a song about a black man who's forcibly separated from his sweetheart, and it's Oh Susanna. It becomes the biggest hit the world had known up until that time. Up until that time, a huge run of printed sheet music would be about 5,000 sheets, and Oh Susanna is 100,000 sheets of music. It's played everywhere. Everybody's singing it. People all over the country. And the publisher, there's no real copyright enforcement in those days, so his publisher gives him this little pittance, but he has no way of keeping track of how many copies are actually sold. And what's more is other publishers just copy the music and publish it themselves. So he doesn't make any money, but he realizes that he might be able to quit his job as a clerk if he can pen enough hits. He falls in love with a woman named Jane McDowell, who becomes his genie with the light brown hair. But he's sort of an impetuous youth. He knows her for 2 months. They get married, in spite of the fact that she cares absolutely nothing about music. He starts to enjoy a fairly modest success by writing songs, blackface minstrel songs for the minstrel stage. Camptown Races becomes pretty famous and spreads all around. It kind of makes Foster uncomfortable because he really wants to be known as a writer of more refined music, but he's only able to make money that mocks black people. So he resolves to make blackface more acceptable and respectable, partly because of his distaste for it and partly because he realizes he can sell more if he can reach a larger audience, an audience of respectable middle-class Northerners. So he decides, in his words, to replace the trashy and really offensive words with lyrics and themes more appropriate for the parlor. He writes a song about a boatman's, black boatman who loses his wife, and the title is Nellie Was a Lady. It's the first time an American songwriter refers to an African-American woman as a lady. He's writing a song in 1851 about the PD River. He doesn't like the sounds of it. He looks at an atlas. He finds Swanee. There's a river in Florida. He writes that. Huge hit. Old Folks at Home. It becomes Old Folks at Home. Newspaper in New York writes, pianos and guitars groan with this song. Sentimental young ladies sing it, boatmen roar it out at all times, and the butcher boy treats you to a strain of it as he hands you the evening steaks. And in spite of this Old Folks at Home, this naive portrayal of life on the plantation, it becomes popular with blacks, with slaves, black slaves. And there's an account of one freed slave, but while she's a slave, she says, I fell in love with my husband-to-be because of his beautiful singing of the Old Folks at Home. He keeps writing hits, but not making very much money at all. He writes My Old Kentucky Home, Beautiful Dreamer, Hard Times Come Again No More. But unfortunately for Foster, hard times come to him. He dies in New York City at the age of 37, divorced and drunk and virtually penniless.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a downer.
So let's play a couple of his songs.
Well,
That changed the feeling of it all.
I'm happy to report that Daddy Rice, who writes Jim Crow, he also dies drunk and
That's
penniless.
better.
So here are a couple of his tunes. Oh, Susanna, Old Black Joe, and Masses in the Cold Ground. No repeats.
Sure.
Can we go over just 4 minutes? Is that all right?
Yeah.
We mentioned him once.
Okay.
We have to
All right.
explain the whole thing.
In his memoir, Northup writes that he's referred to as the Oli Bull of Beowulf. And so we thought we'd just play a little number by Oli Bull. Oli Bull's a Norwegian violin virtuoso. He's born in 1810. And he starts playing in the big orchestras in Norway when he's 9. And he becomes a very high-level virtuoso. He tours internationally. He does 247 concerts in the year 1837 alone. He's very famous. He amasses a huge fortune. He buys lots of old instruments, Stradivariuses, Guarneris, Amatis.
I'm a Guarneri.
Are you?
Yes,
Oh.
yes. Funny
Have you got
should
anything
mention
in the
that, by
attic
way.
that we don't need to know
Do you
about?
have any that you
I
don't
wish.
need? Oh.
And he tours here. He buys land. He tries to start a Norwegian colony here in the States. And he buys a house in West Lebanon, Maine. And he writes this piece of music by only boat. Time. We'll end with one more song. This is by Dan Emmett. He was one of the first big composers for the minstrel stage. This one's called The Boatman's Dance.
And Solomon was a boatman.
He was a boatman. Yes, good point. The boatmen on the rivers were sort of the rock stars of the early 19th century. The boatmen dance, the boatmen sing, the boatmen up to everything. When the boatman gets on shore, he spends his cash and works for more. And boatmen dance and dance, boatmen dance, dance all night till the broad daylight and go home with the gals in the morning. Hi-ho, the boatmen row, floating down the river, yo-hi-ho. Hi-ho, the boatmen row, floating down the river, yo-hi-ho. When you go to the boatman's ball, dance with my wife or you don't dance at all. Sky blue jacket and toppling hat, look out boys for the night till dead. And dance, the boatman dance, and dance, the boatman dance. Dance all night till the broad daylight and go home with the bell in the morning. Hi-ho, the boatman row, floating down the river, yo-hi-ho. Hi-ho, the boatman row, floating down the river, yo-hi-ho. Well, I never seen a pretty girl in my life. She wouldn't be some boatman's wife. When the boatman blow his horn, look out, old man, your daughter's gone. Dance, the boatman dance, and dance, the boatman dance. Dance all night till the broad daylight, and go home with the gals in the morning. Hi-ho, the boatman row, floating down the river, yo-hi-ho. Hi-ho, the boatman row, floating down the river, yo-hi-ho.
Hum the tune on the way home.